Hi, welcome to Tillerman Beads Torm virtual Christmas event on this fine and sunny day here in Torm. You can see I'm dressed for the weather, not really. I'll run through in a minute what we have on offer for the market, but before that I want to say a little bit about what we do. We try to sympathetically reproduce historic bead types, which involves a significant amount of research and into specific grave finds. I also use a reduced colour palette in terms of the glass because I only use colours that would have been available to the bead makers at the time. And in fact, I only use Murano glass because that is as close to the original glass as we can get today, both in its colour and in its consistency. When I'm at a show, I get asked a lot of questions about the beads, which is great. And the most asked question is somebody will walk up and down the table and they'll look at all the beads and they'll say, "Oh, these are lovely, but would they have been that bright? Would they have been that colour?" And the answer, of course, is yes, they would, because the colourants they used then are identical to the colourants that are used today to actually make the various colours of glass. So things like copper, cobalt, iron, manganese, sulphur are all used today, and they would have been used then. So yeah, the colours are the same. And the following question is, well, how would they have made them? Well, the only difference between me and Ivar the Viking making his beads is the heat source that I use. I use a modern oxypropane torch. They would have used a clay-built kiln, wood-fired, and that's the difference. Everything else is identical, from melting a rod of glass in a flame, using that molten glass, winding it round a mandrel, and then adding various types of decoration to the bead, and then letting it cool. Exactly the same today as it was then. And the third question, which is always up there, somebody having looked at all the beads and they're just walking off, and at the very end of the table I have a sign saying grave finds. I have Viking grave finds and Anglo-Saxon grave finds. And the question is, well, what are grave finds? And I explained that, I've researched into various archaeological reports and museum findings, and I have reproduced the beads that would have come from a particular cemetery and a particular grave. So the person that was buried there was wearing these beads. And I had one little kid who was with his mum who looked at me and he said, "What, do you dig them up?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm not a grave robber," and explained again that it takes a lot of research to actually find what was in a particular grave, along with other grave goods, obviously, but I'm only concerned at the moment with beads. Research is very important. I mean, I've got a stack of archaeological reports. Pinterest is quite good, but be careful, because Pinterest is only as good as the person that's using it. A bead will turn up that's been recently excavated, and you'll see one post saying, "Here, new Roman bead," and the next post will use the same image and say, "Oh, a new Saxon find." You've just got to go back to the source and find out where the original was posted, and double check for yourself if you want to be that accurate. Glass beads are one of the few things that actually survived a burial. Being in the ground for a couple of thousand years sometimes takes the edge off them. They're not as bright and shiny as when they went in, but there's enough left normally to sort of determine what design it is, and roughly what sort of time period. Fabric, wood, metal, and sometimes the actual skeleton itself just decomposes, it's just gone, but the glass tends to survive. And over the centuries, the bead designs didn't really change. They stayed fairly consistent. And in fact, some beads are present in every time period. So beads like melon beads, eye beads, wave beads, melon beads. I don't know where you can see these. Is like a little pumpkin bead, has little indentations going around it. Eye beads, where you have small dots of glass melted onto the surface of the bead. Sometimes there's one dot, sometimes there's two, as on this one. But you can go 3, 4, 5 dots on a particularly complex eye bead. And a wave bead is actually what it says. It's a bead with a little wave that sort of lazily goes around the outside. And the question often asked of me is, what's the difference between an Anglo-Saxon and a Viking bead? Well, as a general rule, a Viking bead is linear in its design. It's very vibrant, colours in your face, really strong colours, whereas an Anglo-Saxon bead tends to be a bit more swaggy. Now, if that's not a word, it is now. A swaggy bead, so that you have a design going round the bead that shows a sort of a laser. This is like a figure of 8 with a little dot in the centre. Now, there are some exceptions to that, and there are crossover beads that appear both in Viking and Anglo-Saxon situations. There are 4 main types of decoration that are used on a bead. You can either have dots, or lines, or cables, or frit. I'll explain those quickly now. The dots, I've already said, are eye beads, basically. And that's the simplest way of putting a design on a bead, is to pop a little blob of glass on and then put it back in the heat and melt it smooth. So eye beads, very, very common. Lines, you take again a heated small amount of glass and you pull it into a thinner cable, as thin a strand as you can. Let that cool, and then that can be applied to the surface of the bead. And again, it's a very popular way and an easy way of adding decoration to a bead. Cables. Now, if you take a little sandwich of glass, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 colours, lay them on top of each other, you heat them till they're molten, just, and then you start to pull them apart. And as you pull, you twist, and you can either counter twist or not counter twist. So you get different types of opposing twists on a bead. And frit. Now, frit beads are where you take all your old bits of glass that you're not going to use, you crunch them up into small flakes, and then as you're making the bead and it's in its molten state, you can then sprinkle this frit, this powdered glass, onto the surface of the bead and then melt it smooth. And that's an easy way, again, of decorating a bead. And it actually leaves quite a nice sort of speckly appearance on the bead. It's quite a good way of decorating a bead. If you consider that a bead is a really small surface area of glass in which to add decoration to, and there's only so many possibilities that you can go through before you start hitting repeats, you see things repeating themselves constantly. What to look for when you buy a bead? Well, if you're buying historic beads suitable for reenactment, look for the colour, because I've seen some really nice beads for sale on Etsy claiming to be, suitable for reenactment. No problem. But they're the wrong colour, because there are hundreds of shades of glass today. I use between 15 and 20 maybe on the outside. A bead made of really acidic yellow or pinks or purples, those colours didn't exist back then. So, just be careful. I have a lump here of what's called goldstone, which is a really nice glass. It's infused with brass shavings. It's a Venetian invention, and it was around about mid-1500s that it was invented and used in Venice. I've seen Viking beads made using goldstone, which of course is completely wrong. And a bead that is made from the wrong colour of glass is like making a Saxon tunic using lycra, or a Seax with a carbon fibre handle. It's just not right. So just look carefully at the colours of the beads that you're buying. Look at other things like the hole in the bead. Make sure it's clean. if it's got a white residue on the inside, that's the bead release. That's a normal part of the making process. But if it's not been cleaned out, it means that the bead probably hasn't been annealed. Because if you try and clean and unanneal the bead, the chances of that bead breaking are quite high. Annealing gets all the different colours of glass that you've used, and instead of them being separate colours within the bead, they go back into the heat in the kiln, and they're brought up to just below their melting point, and all the colours sort of fuse together, so you've got like one homogeneous bead. And then if it cools nice and slowly, that bead will last a lifetime. So annealing beads is really vital. All of my beads are authentic as they can be, given that they're made on a modern torch. And they're all suitable for reenactment purposes. If you're not quite sure what you want or what you would be allowed to wear in a group, if you just join the group or whatever, come and talk to us, because we can tell you exactly and point you in the right direction. I do accept commission work, and I can work from images so long as there's an indication of colour and scale. Again, if you just contact me on email, we can discuss it and how long it would take to make and cost and so on. Thanks for watching this video. It's only a short introduction. Hope to see you soon at a physical show, please. And following this is a short video that just goes through some of the items we have on sale for the Christmas market. Thank you very much.